dog person. When I say that, I hope you don't hear that I'm anti-cat because I am not. For one bit, I just always grew up with dogs. The rest of my family has dogs now. Hannah and I have our own dog today, and so I've always been around dogs. I've always been a dog person. But for one summer of my life, though, I actually lived with cats. A few years ago, I spent a few months living in a host home while I was in a summer internship. And the people who opened up their home to me had cats. And the cats were fine. Like, they were great. They were fine. Didn't have a single problem with the cats. Living with cats was great. It was different than living with dogs. A litter box is just a little bit different, a little bit of a jump to get used to, but it was completely fine. And so part of the deal with me staying in this host home was that there was going to be 1 week in the summer where my hosts were out of town, and I had to make sure that the house stayed standing and the cats stayed alive and the litter box was clean. Again, all three things of equal importance and difficulty in my mind at the time. But I had to do those three things, which is not a ton to ask, right? Like, that's pretty much the bare minimum that you can do for staying in a house completely rent-free for an entire summer. And that week by myself went pretty well, as much as it probably could, seeing over the whole house by myself, until the very end of the week. One of the last days was when I was in this house by myself. I woke up late, and so I was just rushing to get ready as quickly as I could, and I fly out of the house, and I get to my internship, and I sit down at my desk, and I just smell this weird smell. It's one of those smells that's it's not horrible, but it's just kind of weird and funky, and it's not good, right? But it's not I gotta get out of here right now. But I who I am. You should know this about me is if I smell a weird smell, I want to know the source of it. I want to know where this thing is coming from. I want to identify it. And my desk was close to another intern's, so my first thought was it's totally this other person. They smell weird today. But they got up and left, and the smell was still there. And I was like, okay, I got to figure out what is going on. And I could not figure it out. And everywhere I went in the building that I worked, I smelled this smell, and I couldn't figure it out. And it drove me crazy. At one point during the end of the day, I was in a meeting, and I even asked everyone I was in the meeting with, okay, does anyone else smell this weird, strange, odd smell that you can't really put a finger on exactly what it is, but you know it's weird? And no one else smelled it. They're we don't know what you're talking about. So I gave up. I was whatever. This is going to drive me crazy, but it's okay. I don't need to know. And I thought it would just be this big mystery until I got home. And I had a fantastic revelation of where the source came from, or where the smell came from. You see, it wasn't anyone that I worked with. It wasn't the building that I worked in. The smell came from me. Because what happened was when I got home, I took my shoes and socks off, and inside one of my socks was a strange, gooey, smelly substance. And what I put together, and I still do not know how this happened, was that one of the cats puked on the steps. There was a flight of stairs in the house that I was staying in. They puked on it. I did not notice, and not only did I not notice, I stepped in it without noticing, proceeded to put a sock over it, and rocked a sock full of cat puke for an entire day, and thought everyone else was the problem. This was 6 years ago. I have no idea how I did this, and how I didn't realize, what's this squishy thing in my shoe? Maybe that's the problem. Here's why I share that story. One, so you guys know, I'm super cool. And two, because my quest to find that smell was all about finding the source, right? I wanted to find the source. Where is this smell coming from? And I could have, looked all day in the wrong places. I could have sprayed a bunch of air freshener. I could have lit as many candles as I wanted to. But until I found the source, until I realized what the real problem was, that smell, that problem wasn't going to get any better. And we've been in this series, Intentional, for a few weeks now, since the beginning of the month. And one of the things that you've probably heard said a few times now already is, when it comes to these foundational ideas within our faith, If we want to be intentional with these foundational practices, we have to do just that. We have to get down to the foundation. We have to get to the source. We have to get into what these things really are and why we do them, whether it's serving or praying or reading our Bible or worship, whatever we look at, we need to get to the source, because if we're not careful, if we don't get to the source, if we don't take the time to ask, why do we do this? What is the purpose of what we do? What are the purpose of these things that we believe in doing within our faith? We can misplace our intentionality. We can want to be intentional, or we can think that we're being intentional, but until we get to the source, until we get to why, our intentionality can be misguided. And I think too often we can jump into doing something just because we know we should be doing it, or we feel like it's the right thing to do, or we feel like, like this is what good Christians do, but we don't actually ever take the time to ask, why do we do that? What is the purpose of this? And I think this is huge when it comes to worship. Worship has been a key focus of the church since its beginning, and it's obviously still a huge part of what we do. But the problem, though, is that if we jump into worship without knowing what it really is or why we do it, any intentionality with it, like I said, can be misplaced or misguided. And just like anything else, if we don't know what something is really about, if we don't know why we do it, if we don't get to the source, that intentionality will just be misguided, misplaced. But what I want to say up top is that I think too often we can confuse how we worship with what worship is all about. We can confuse our expressions of worship with why we worship. What I mean is that when we think about worship, so often we think about music and singing and experiences, right? Like my title is Associate Worship Pastor, and most of what I do is music and singing and experiences. But I think too often we can just jump into that's what worship is, without ever actually asking, why do we call that worship? Why is that an expression of what worship is all about? Which I think takes us to this question. What is worship, and why do we do it? What is worship, and why do we do it? Let's get to the source. I think the best way that we can jump in and get to the source comes from the book of Romans. Paul is writing to the church in Rome and just lays out this incredible letter of all these foundational ideas of faith. And in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, he says this. He says, "And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him." So Paul is saying that worship looks like sacrifice. It looks like surrender. It looks like obedience. Worship looks like taking every single part of our lives, no matter how mundane or no matter how incredible, and laying it before God because he is worthy of everything. True worship is giving every single piece of ourselves to God. It's our way of expressing to God that he alone is utterly worthy of everything we know, everything we have, and everything that we are, not only because he created us and knows us, but because he is continually with us and for us and longs to have an intimate, deep relationship with us. And to accomplish that, he sent his son Jesus to die an unfair death, but defeat death and defeat the power of sin and separation and shame so we could know him and know him forever, and our lives right now would be transformed. And when we think about that, when we think about what God has done for us and what God continues to do for us every single day, like how could we not worship him? How could we not say, God, everything is yours. God, I'm going to lay it down every single day. Everything that I know and have and believe in is absolutely yours, period. God, you are the God who loves us unconditionally in an unending way, and so I'm going to give everything I have. And I think when we experience in our own lives that radical transformation that salvation brings, we can't help but give God everything that we have. To put it in a sentence, worship is because of God, it's for God, and it's about God, because God alone is worthy. And as I was running through this, as I was prepping for tonight, I kept thinking I wish there was more there But I think that's the point, is so often we make this so complicated, where we make worship about all of these different things. And guys, trust me, we could talk about worship for a long time, because worship involves so many things. But this is the source. This is what our worship comes down to. Do we believe God is worthy? And you might be sitting there and thinking like, okay, I believe all of those things, but like practically, that's a whole different world. And I agree with you, if that's what you're thinking. I think it's way easier to say that and be like, how can we not give God everything? And it's a whole other thing to actually give God everything. And so why is it so hard? We're going to look at two different ways. I think help us break down why this can be so hard, how we can bridge that gap. And the first way is, I think we need to make the decision to be intentional about what you worship. There's this interesting story in the book of Acts, where Paul and Barnabas were in a town, and this man gets healed. And the people who see the man get healed respond by worshiping, but they worship Paul and Barnabas. They don't worship God, they worship Paul and Barnabas. Like, these guys are so great. But Paul and Barnabas are so upset by this that they actually tear their clothes. And this is what they say. We don't know which one of them said this or both said this, but here's what they say. They say, "What do you think you're doing? We're not gods. We are men just like you. We're people just like you. We're here to bring you the message, to persuade you to abandon these silly God superstitions and embrace God himself, the living God. We don't make God. He makes us. In all of this, sky, earth, sea, and everything in them." And notice in particular what Paul or Barnabas say at the end there. We don't make God. He makes us. You know, if God alone is worthy of our worship, then nothing else can be. And too often, it's far too easy to make gods out of people and things and experiences and give our worship and give our surrender, give everything to those things. What I mean is that we can give our attention and our time and our energy and our focus to things that just can't satisfy or sustain us or give us life, when only God is worthy of those things. And hear me out. Like, I'm not saying like throw your phone in the ocean or like ditch all your friends. I think most people, things, and experiences aren't bad at all. But we have to be really careful about the order in which we place those things in our lives. You know, I think my best tool to figure out if this is something that you're struggling with, and this is what I use in my own life, is to ask myself this question, is who or what do I turn to first? You know, when you're excited, or when you're bored, or when you're angry, or when you're upset, or when you're anxious, or when you're worried, who or what gets your attention, your time, your energy, and your focus first? You know, that could be an app, or it could be a person, or it could be a website, or a game, or a food, or a drink. Again, not because I think most of those things are bad, but because you weren't designed to have those things be the focus of your life, for them to be the focus of your worship and your surrender. And some of those things were designed to take as much as that as possible, but you weren't designed to have a healthier relationship with your Creator with any of those things being first before God. And being intentional with your worship means being intentional with what you don't worship. And that happens by continually taking stock of what might be taking the place of your first time, your focus, your energy. What takes the place of your worship first? The other thing is, I think you have to be intentional with when you worship. You know, in one point, when Jesus was on the earth, he said something really interesting about this. In the book of Matthew, he said, "And when you fast, don't make it obvious, as the hypocrites do. For they try to look miserable and disheveled so people will admire them for their fasting. And I tell you the truth, that is the only reward they will ever get. But when you fast, comb your hair and wash your face. Then no one will notice that you are fasting, except your Father, who knows what you do in private. And your Father, who sees everything, will reward you." And there's a lot there. But I think the overall overarching point that Jesus is making is worship isn't about you or for you. And that's something that can be hard to hear, but it's something that all of us, no asterisk, everyone, all of us need to hear all the time. Because if worship is truly because of, for, and about God and God alone, then it can't be about us. It can't be for us, or it can't be because of us. If worship is only about the music we like, if it's only about singing the loudest, if it's only about chasing an emotional high, then it becomes about us and we miss the mark. And I want to stop right there and say, like, this is so tricky. Like, this is such a fine line. And I hope you hear my heart in this. Because I think there are so many times when certain songs hit us in a different way, and we want to chase after those songs. You know, I think of that last song, Waymaker. Like, there were times in my life where, like, man, like, when I needed to sing those lines, like, even though I don't see it, even though I don't feel it, like, God, I know you're working, and it's good to have those songs. There are times when we need to give God everything, and I'm going to sing as loud as I can, and I'm just going to lay it all out there. There are times where we are just overcome by emotion of the moment, and we put our hands up, and those are all such good things. But like everything, it comes down to our intentions. Am I doing this for me, or am I doing this just to give it all to God? And ultimately, here's where I'll wrap that up, is that it is your job to do the work of keeping your intentions honest and clear. And it is not your job to wonder or judge anyone else's intentions in worship, period. And again, if God is the focus of our worship and God alone is solely worthy of that worship, then nothing and no one else, including ourselves, can be. Now, going back to those verses in Matthew, notice that when Jesus is talking about this, when he's making this big point, that he's not talking about singing, he's not talking about music, he's talking about fasting. And that's because if worship is really any way that we choose obedience to him, that we choose surrender to him, then worship is way more than the songs that we sing in church. You know, worship is songs that we sing, because I think in particular, these are great ways for us to connect with God. These are great ways to give God glory and honor and praise and just surrender everything to him. And I think the reason why they've been the main expression of worship in the church for so long is because of how music and singing together is able to just bring us or move us to a place of surrender, of ascribing worth to God, and especially when we're able to do that in a community like this one right here. But it's so much more. Because, you know, we also worship when we pray. We worship when we fast. We worship when we give. That verse that we opened up with in Romans 12:1, and in the Message paraphrase, it goes like this. Take your everyday, ordinary life. You're sleeping, you're eating, going to work, and walking around, and place it before God as an offering. You know, worship isn't based on your preferences. Worship is based on your willingness to let God's presence guide and be a part of every single part of your life. And every time you choose to let go of your way of doing things and submit to God's way, that's worship. Whether it's giving or praying or singing or fasting or celebrating, no matter what it is, every time that we choose that and make that decision, that is worship to God. So being intentional with when you worship means knowing that it's not about me. So this can invade every single part of my life. This can be everything that I do and permeate every single thing that I experience and every choice that I make. You know, there is so much more that we could talk about when it comes to worship. Like we said earlier, we could talk and talk and talk, and I've said this before, but like, man, if like we got the chance to like sit down over coffee or ice cream or whatever, like we could talk about worship forever. And there's so much more that we could talk about, and so many more good things about worship that we could add on. But that's the point. Everything is an addition to this. Everything is an addition to the source. So this is where we start. We start by recognizing that God is worthy of our complete surrender. God is worthy of every single thing that we know and experience and have and are. And when we work to recognize what is getting our worship that shouldn't, and we continually remind ourselves that worship isn't for us, it's not about us, but rather it's about God, it's for God, and it's because of God, we lay a foundation for worship in our lives. We get to the source. Which brings us to this question. Do you believe that God is worthy of your total surrender? Do you believe God is worthy of your total surrender? I'm going to invite the band back up. And we're going to respond with one more song. And this song is, in particular, a chance to ask yourself, as honestly as you can, this question. And for you, it might be a time where you're like, man, I've got to shift my focus. Like, I've gotten my eyes off of what this is all about, and I need to recenter. I need to refocus. You know, it might look like digging into what's been taking your focus, what's been taking your surrender, what's been coming first before you give that to God. You know, it might just look like this song, we're going to sing out, Jesus, we love you. It might just look like a time to say, like, Jesus, I love you. And I've been holding it back. But right now, I want to say, I love you. And this is just about you and me. This is all about you. It's for you, and it's because of you. I can't answer this question for you. Only you can answer this question for yourself. And so we're going to respond and worship. Not because singing or music is the only way that we worship, or not because we have to sing out loud, or not because we have to lay it all out to God because it's the right thing to do, but as our chance to respond. To tell God, like, you are worthy of everything. Every single thing.